The champagne glass slips from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the Mountain View Country Club's bridal suite. But the sound is nothing compared to the words that just came through my phone. Rebecca Hayes, our wedding planner, stands frozen in the doorway, her face pale as she watches me crumble onto the antique velvet chair that moments ago had been the perfect backdrop for my final touch-ups, before walking down the aisle. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Lisa Rodriguez, my maid of honor and best friend since college, rushes to my side, her emerald green dress rustling against the scattered glass fragments. The Colorado mountain sunset streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a golden glow that now feels mocking, surreal. I can barely form the words, my voice coming out as a whisper that somehow fills the entire elegant room. Brian took them. He took Emma and Jake. The silence that follows is deafening. Outside, I can hear the string quartet playing softly, as 200 guests take their seats for what should be the happiest day of my life. Michael Chen, the man I'm supposed to marry in 20 minutes, is probably adjusting his tie one last time, completely unaware that our perfect day has just become a living nightmare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone call had come from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably Brian Torres, my ex-husband, the father of my children, and the man who had made the last 2 years of my life a legal and emotional battlefield. His voice carried that same cold satisfaction I remembered from our worst fights, the tone that told me he believed he'd won something. "Congratulations on your big day, Sarah," he had said, each word dripping with false pleasantry. "I hope you understand that Emma and Jake won't be attending the reception as planned. They're with their father now, where they belong, and we're going somewhere your new husband and his fancy lawyers can't reach us." I had tried to respond, tried to demand answers, but the line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in my wedding dress, surrounded by flowers and champagne, and the remnants of what was supposed to be the beginning of my new life. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing white, a symbol of new beginnings, while my past was literally stealing my future. Lisa immediately springs into action, her legal training as a family attorney kicking in even through her shock. "Call 911 right now," she instructs Rebecca, who fumbles for her own phone. "Then call Michael and tell him what's happening. Don't let anyone else know yet. We need to control this situation." My hands shake as I speed dial my mother, Carol Mitchell, who was supposed to be watching Emma and Jake until it was time for them to walk down the aisle as my flower girl and ring bearer. They had been so excited about their roles in the wedding, Emma practicing her pedal-dropping technique for weeks, Jake proudly showing everyone who would listen his miniature tuxedo that matched Michael. "Mom, please tell me the kids are with you," I say when she answers, though I already know the answer from Brian's call. "Honey, what do you mean? Brian came by about an hour ago with some story about a last-minute change of plan. He had official-looking paperwork that said you'd requested he pick them up early for the wedding." He seemed different, more polite than usual, almost apologetic. "Said he wanted to make sure they looked perfect for walking down the aisle." Her voice begins to crack as she realizes something is terribly wrong. "Sarah, what's happening?" "The paperwork. Of course Brian would have thought of everything. During our divorce proceedings, I'd learned exactly how manipulative and thorough he could be when he wanted something. He'd been in military intelligence before our marriage, and those skills translated seamlessly into civilian manipulation. The man who once promised to protect our family was now using those same tactical abilities against us." Michael appears in the doorway, his face a mixture of confusion and growing alarm as Rebecca fills him in. His black tuxedo is perfectly pressed, his dark hair styled exactly as we'd planned, but his eyes hold a panic that mirrors my own. This wasn't how either of us had imagined starting our marriage. "Sarah, we'll find them," he says, moving to take my hands, careful to avoid the broken glass. "Whatever Brian thinks he's accomplishing, we'll get Emma and Jake back safe." I want to believe him, want to draw strength from his certainty. But Michael doesn't know Brian the way I do. Doesn't understand the depths of resentment that have been building since our divorce was finalized 2 years ago. Brian had never truly accepted that our marriage was over, had never stopped believing that somehow he could force us back together. And my engagement to Michael had pushed him past the point of rational thinking. The police arrive within 10 minutes, their presence turning our wedding venue into what feels like a crime scene. Officer Maria Santos, a compact woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, immediately begins taking our statements while her partner coordinates with dispatch about issuing an Amber Alert. The surreal nature of giving a police report in my wedding dress, surrounded by bouquets and champagne bottles, makes everything feel like a nightmare I can't wake up from. "Mrs. Torres, I need you to focus," Officer Santos says gently but firmly. "When was the last time you spoke with your ex-husband? Had he made any threats recently about the custody arrangement or your wedding?" The questions force me to relive the past months of increasingly erratic behavior from Brian. The late-night phone calls where he'd ramble about how Michael was trying to replace him as the children's father. The way he'd started showing up at Emma's school unexpectedly, forcing me to alert the administration about potential issues. The court motions he'd filed challenging our custody agreement, each one more desperate and baseless than the last. 3 days ago, I tell her, my voice steadying as I focus on the fact he called and said he wouldn't attend the wedding, even though the custody agreement required him to return the children by 6 p.m. today for the ceremony. When I reminded him of the court order, he laughed and said court orders were just pieces of paper that couldn't protect anyone. Michael's brother David Chen arrives, having been summoned from his role as best man. His resemblance to Michael is striking, but where Michael's expression shows concern and determination, David's face betrays a hint of something else. Not quite doubt, but a wariness that makes me wonder what he's thinking about his brother marrying a woman whose ex-husband just kidnapped her children on their wedding day. "The guest," David says quietly to Michael. "They're starting to ask questions." The ceremony was supposed to start 15 minutes ago. The weight of the situation hits me fully. 200 people are sitting outside, expecting a wedding, while I'm in here giving a statement to police about my missing friends and family who traveled from across the country, who took time off work and bought gifts and dressed up for what was supposed to be a celebration. Michael's extended family, many of whom I'm still getting to know, now witnessing the chaos that comes with marrying into my complicated situation. "Cancel it," I say without hesitation. "Cancel everything. Send everyone home." "No," Michael says firmly, surprising me. "We don't cancel anything until we know more. Brian wants to disrupt our lives, control our happiness, make us react out of fear. We're not giving him that satisfaction." Officer Santos looks up from her notepad. "Actually, Mr. Chen makes a good point. Maintaining normal activities can sometimes help in these situations. The perpetrator may expect chaos and disruption. If you proceed with some version of the ceremony, it might give us tactical advantage." The idea seems insane, going through with a wedding while my children are missing. But I'm starting to understand that nothing about this situation will follow normal logic. Brian has calculated this timing precisely, knowing that our wedding day would be when I'd be most vulnerable, most desperate to resolve things quickly rather than let him ruin what we've planned for months. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number, and my heart stops as I read Brian's words. "Hope you enjoy your special day. The kids are safe and happy. We'll be in touch about permanent arrangements. Don't bother looking for us. You'll never find us alone." I show the message to Officer Santos, who immediately signals her partner. "We need the FBI," she says. "This just became a federal kidnapping case." The next hour passes in a blur of phone calls and procedure. FBI agent Jennifer Walsh arrives, a tall woman with graying hair, and the kind of calm authority that suggests she's handled situations like this before. She immediately takes control of the investigation, setting up a command center in the country club's conference room and coordinating with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. "Miss Torres," Agent Walsh says, pulling me aside while technicians set up equipment to monitor my phone, "I need you to understand something important. Your ex-husband has planned this carefully, but that also means he's likely to make contact again. When he does, we'll be ready." The Amber Alert goes out at 7:30 just as our ceremony was supposed to be concluding. The description of Brian's blue Honda Pilot and my children's information begins broadcasting across Colorado and neighboring states. My phone immediately starts buzzing with calls and texts from friends and family who've received the alert, not knowing it's connected to my wedding day. Lisa takes charge of managing the guests, explaining the situation to close family while asking others to simply go home with our apologies and gratitude for understanding. The catering staff, unsure what to do with the elaborate dinner they've prepared, begins packing everything into containers. Rebecca, our wedding planner, moves through the venue like a ghost, mechanically handling the logistics of dismantling what should have been a celebration. Michael refuses to change out of his tuxedo, insisting that we're still getting married today, just not in the way we planned. His loyalty touches me deeply, but I can see the strain in his face, the way this crisis is testing everything we've built together. We've been together for 2 years, engaged for 8 months, and throughout our relationship, Brian has been a constant source of stress and conflict. Michael knew what he was signing up for when he proposed, but I don't think either of us imagined it would come to this. Sarah, Agent Walsh calls me over to where she's reviewing files that were apparently rushed over from the Denver FBI office. I've been looking at your ex-husband's background. Military intelligence, specialized training in surveillance and evasion techniques. He's not going to make this easy, but he's also not going to hurt the children. Everything in his profile suggests this is about control and emotional manipulation, not physical harm. The psychological assessment provides some comfort, but it also confirms my worst fears about how prepared Brian might be for this. During our marriage, I'd been proud of his military service, his intelligence and strategic thinking. Now those same qualities have turned him into the perfect antagonist, someone who knows exactly how to stay ahead of law enforcement, while maximizing the emotional damage to his target. My mother arrives at the country club, tears streaming down her face as she apologizes over and over for letting Brian take the children. She describes how
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Convincing he'd been, how official the paperwork looked, how he'd even brought flowers as an apology for any inconvenience. The manipulation had been flawless, designed to exploit her desire to help and her trust in official-looking documents. He knew exactly what to say, she tells Agent Walsh through her tears. He said Sarah wanted everything to be perfect for the wedding, that there had been a change in the timeline, that he was trying to be cooperative for once. I should have called Sarah first, but he seemed so. As the evening progresses and the command center fills with FBI personnel, local police, and victim advocates, I find myself sitting in my wedding dress in a conference room that smells of coffee and tension, instead of flowers and celebration. The irony is overwhelming. I should be cutting cake with my new husband right now, dancing to our first song, surrounded by love and joy. Instead, I'm coordinating with federal agents about my ex-husband's possible escape routes and psychological motivation. Michael sits beside me, still in his tuxedo, his hand never leaving mine as we answer endless questions about Brian's habits, associates, and possible destinations. David hovers nearby, fielding calls from Michael's family, and trying to manage the ripple effects of our derailed wedding. I can see the weight of the situation affecting him too, the realization that marrying into my family means inheriting this level of chaos and danger. Agent Walsh explains the search protocols they're implementing, the technology they're using to track Brian's vehicle and credit cards, the coordination with other law enforcement agencies. But with each hour that passes, the likelihood of a quick resolution diminishes. Brian isn't acting impulsively, he's executing a plan he's probably been developing for weeks or months. The timing tells us everything, Agent Walsh observes as we review the day's events. He waited until your wedding day, until the moment when disruption would cause maximum emotional damage. He's not planning to return the children anytime soon. This is about destroying your happiness and forcing you to choose between your new marriage and your children. The choice Brian is trying to force me to make becomes clearer with each passing hour. Cancel the wedding, abandon my relationship with Michael, prove that he still controls my life and my children's future, or proceed with my marriage while my children are missing. looking like a woman who prioritizes her own happiness over her children's safety. It's a no-win scenario crafted by someone who understands exactly how to weaponize my love for both my children and Michael. As the clock approaches midnight, marking the end of what should have been my wedding day, Agent Walsh receives a call that changes everything. Brian's vehicle has been spotted at a gas station near the Wyoming border, but when police arrived, they found it abandoned with no sign of him or the children. The discovery launches a new phase of the investigation, expanding the search area and bringing in additional resources from multiple states. Lisa, still in her maid of honor dress, but now acting as my legal counsel, pulls me aside as the FBI coordinates with Wyoming authorities. Sarah, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this could take days or weeks to resolve. Brian clearly has resources and plans we don't know about. You can't put your entire life on hold indefinitely, but how do you move forward when your children are missing? How do you celebrate love when the people you love most are in danger? The questions have no good answers, only the terrible reality that Brian has successfully turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into the beginning of the worst crisis I've ever faced. The command center continues to buzz with activity as federal agents coordinate search efforts across multiple states. Michael's family begins to arrive, having driven through the night from various locations after hearing about the situation. Their faces show a mixture of concern and bewilderment. Family members who came expecting to celebrate a wedding now finding themselves part of a kidnapping investigation. As dawn breaks over the Colorado mountains, casting the same beautiful light that should have illuminated our wedding photos, I realize that my marriage to Michael has already begun, just not with the ceremony we planned. We've been tested by crisis from the very first day, forced to prove our commitment, not through traditional vows, but through our response to unimaginable circumstance. And somewhere out there, Emma and Jake are waiting for us to bring them home, unaware that their father has turned their lives into weapons in a war that should have ended with our divorce 2 years ago. The first rays of Sunday morning sunlight filter through the conference room windows as Agent Walsh spreads a detailed map of the western United States across the mahogany table. Red pins mark confirmed sightings of Brian's abandoned Honda Pilot, while blue pins indicate possible destinations based on his known associates and financial record. The visual representation of how far my children might be from me makes my chest tighten with a fear that threatens to overwhelm my ability to think clearly. Miss Torres, I need you to focus on something important, Agent Walsh says, her voice cutting through the exhaustion that has settled over everyone in the room. Your ex-husband made contact yesterday specifically to taunt you, to let you know he was in control. That behavior pattern suggests he'll reach out again, probably within the next 24 hours. When he does, we need you to be ready. Michael adjusts his loosened tie, the only concession he's made to the fact that our wedding is now 16 hours overdue. His determination to maintain some sense of normalcy in the face of this crisis both amazes and worries me. I can see the toll this is taking on him, the way his jaw clenches when he thinks I'm not looking, the protective anger building in his eyes whenever Brian's name is mentioned. Ready? How? I ask, though part of me dreads the answer. Every interaction with Brian over the past 2 years has felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing which word or tone might trigger his anger or manipulation. Agent Walsh exchanges a glance with her partner, Agent Rodriguez, a younger man with kind eyes who's been coordinating with the technical team setting up monitoring equipment. We want you to engage with him, keep him talking. The longer he stays on the line, the better our chances of tracing his location. More importantly, we need to understand his demands, his endgame. Right now we're operating blind. The thought of voluntarily engaging with Brian, of hearing his voice again after yesterday's devastating phone call, makes my stomach turn, but the alternative is sitting here helplessly while my children remain missing, possibly being moved further away with each passing hour. Emma and Jake have never been away from me for more than a weekend, and the thought of them waking up confused and scared in some unfamiliar place pushes me past my fear. Lisa, who has been on her phone with various legal contacts since dawn, approaches our table with a grim expression. I've been talking to family court judges and prosecutors across 3 states. The good news is that Brian's actions yesterday constitute clear violations of multiple federal laws, not just the existing custody agreement. The bad news is that until we locate him, all the legal firepower in the world doesn't help us. Carol, my mother, sits in a corner chair that's too big for her small frame, clutching a cup of coffee that's long since gone cold. She hasn't stopped apologizing for letting Brian take the children, despite everyone's assurances that his deception would have fooled anyone. The official-looking documents he presented, complete with forged signatures and legal letterhead, demonstrated a level of preparation that still chills me to consider. Sarah, she says quietly, I keep thinking about how he acted yesterday, almost grateful, like he was trying to make amends for something. He even asked about your dress, said he hoped you'd be happy. It was so strange, so unlike the angry man we've dealt with during the divorce. Agent Walsh looks up sharply from her notes. That's significant. The behavioral shift suggests this isn't just an impulsive act of revenge. He's been planning this carefully, probably for months, and he needed to present a completely different persona to execute it successfully. The conference room door opens to admit Rebecca Hayes, our wedding planner, who looks like she's aged years overnight. Her usually perfect professional demeanor has been replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone trying to manage an impossible situation. Behind her trails David Chen, Michael's brother, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries that no one has any appetite for. The venue is completely cleaned up, Rebecca reports, her voice flat with professional efficiency masking personal devastation. I've contacted all the vendors, canceled the honeymoon arrangements, and sent explanatory messages to the out-of-town guests. Everyone understands the circumstances, but she trails off, unable to finish the thought about how completely Brian has managed to destroy what should have been a perfect day. David sets down the food and turns to Michael with an expression I can't quite read. Mom and Dad are driving up from Colorado Springs. They should be here by noon. The rest of the family is waiting for word about whether to come or go home. The unspoken question hangs in the air. How long are we all going to put our lives on hold for this crisis? Michael's response surprises everyone in the room, including me. Tell them to come. Brian wants to isolate Sarah, make her feel like she's facing this alone. We're going to do the opposite. He's going to see that taking Emma and Jake means taking on all of us. Agent Walsh nods approvingly. That's exactly the right approach. Family support systems often deter perpetrators from escalating their behavior. They prefer isolated victims who feel powerless and alone. As if summoned by our conversation about isolation, my phone begins to ring. The number is different from yesterday, but something about the timing makes my blood freeze. Agent Walsh immediately signals the technical team, who spring into action with recording equipment and tracing software. Remember, Agent Walsh whispers urgently, keep him talking, ask about the children's welfare, try to determine their location without being obvious about it. I accept the call with trembling fingers, putting it on speaker so everyone can hear. Brian's voice fills the conference room, carrying that same false cheerfulness that made yesterday's call so chilling. Good morning, beautiful. I hope you managed to get some sleep despite all the excitement yesterday. His tone is conversational, almost intimate, as if we're old friends catching up rather than a divorced couple in the middle of a kidnapping crisis. Where are my children, Brian? I force my voice to remain steady, though every instinct screams at me to demand their immediate return. Our children are perfectly safe and having quite an adventure. Emma asked about you this morning. Actually, wanted to know if you went through with the wedding despite their absence. I told her I didn't think you would prioritize a party over your family's well-being. The casual cruelty of using Emma's concern as a weapon against me makes Michael's hands clench into fists. Agent Walsh quickly writes a note and slides it toward me. Ask about their location, activities, routine. Are they eating properly? Did they sleep well? Emma gets scared in new places without her stuffed elephant. The questions pour out before I can stop them, maternal concern overriding strategic thinking. Brian's laugh carries a warmth that would sound genuine to anyone who didn't know him. Always the worried mother. They're eating better than they have in months, actually. Fresh mountain air, outdoor activities, quality time with their father instead of being shuffled between babysitters while you plan your new life. Agent Walsh immediately writes a note to Agent Rodriguez, who slips out of the room to coordinate with the search teams. Brian's slip about their location might be the first real clue we've gotten. Brian, this has gone far enough. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made. Bring Emma and Jake home, and we can talk about adjusting the custody arrangement. The words taste like poison, but if negotiations can end this crisis, I'll promise him anything. Oh, but we are talking about custody arrangement. I've had my lawyer draw up some papers that I think you'll find very reasonable. 60-40 custody split, Emma and Jake living primarily with me, and of course, an end to this ridiculous marriage to your software engineer. The demands hit me like physical blows. Brian isn't just trying to disrupt my wedding, he's attempting to completely rewrite our post-divorce relationship, using our children as leverage to force me back into his orbit of control. Michael steps closer to the phone, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. This is Michael Ch. I'd like to speak with Emma and Jake, please. I want to make sure they're truly safe. The silence on the other end stretches for long seconds before Brian responds, and when he does, his false friendliness has evaporated. The new husband wants to play daddy. That's touching. But Emma and Jake don't need to talk to strangers right now. They're bonding with their real father. I'm not a stranger, Michael replies evenly. I've been part of their lives for 2 years. Emma helped me pick out Sarah's engagement ring. Jake and I built a treehouse in our backyard last month. They know me, they trust me, and they're probably wondering where I am right now. Agent Walsh looks impressed by Michael's approach, the way he's establishing his legitimate relationship with the children while subtly pressuring Brian to prove they're unharmed. But Brian's response shows he's not easily manipulated. How sweet, the instant family fantasy. But you see, Michael, that little fantasy is over now. Sarah's going to be much too busy being a proper mother to play house with you anymore. The call ends abruptly, leaving us staring at the silent phone while the technical team analyzes what they've recorded. Agent Rodriguez returns with updates from the search coordination, his expression cautiously optimistic. The mention of mountain air and fresh outdoor activities narrows our search significantly. We're focusing on camping areas, cabins, and recreational facilities within a 6-hour drive of Denver. The abandoned vehicle near the Wyoming border suggests he continued north, possibly into Montana or Idaho. Lisa immediately opens her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she searches property records and known associates. During the divorce proceedings, Brian mentioned inheriting some family property from his grandfather. I remember because he tried to claim it was marital property subject to division. Let me see if I can find the specific location. As Lisa works, Michael pulls me aside, his face serious but determined. Sarah, I need you to know something. Whatever Brian thinks he's accomplishing, whatever promises he forces you to make to get Emma and Jake back, I'm not going anywhere. He wants me to be the weak link, the new guy who runs when things get complicated, but he's miscalculated. The conviction in Michael's voice moves me to tears for the first time since this crisis began. Through all the chaos and fear, he's remained steadfast, refusing to let Brian's manipulation drive a wedge between us. But I can also see the toll this is taking on him, the way he's having to prove his commitment to our family under the worst possible circumstances. I found something, Lisa announces, her voice carrying the excitement of a breakthrough. Brian's grandfather owned a hunting cabin on 40 acres near Glacier National Park in Montana. The property was passed down through the family, but it's remote enough that regular law enforcement might not think to check there. Agent Walsh immediately coordinates with the Montana field office, requesting aerial surveillance of the property while ground teams prepare for a potential approach. But even as hope builds around the conference table, she cautions us about moving too quickly. If we're wrong about the location, or if we spook him with an obvious law enforcement presence, he could move the children again, or escalate the situation. We need to be absolutely certain before we make our move. The next several hours pass in a blur of coordination and preparation. FBI teams in Montana begin surveillance of the hunting cabin, while local law enforcement establishes checkpoints on major highways.
My phone remains silent, but the technical team assures us they're ready to trace any future calls within seconds. Michael's parents arrive from Colorado Springs, bringing with them the kind of steady parental support that I desperately need, but feels strange to accept from people who are essentially strangers. Margaret and Robert Chen are everything. Brian always claimed Michael's family would be cold, formal, judgmental of our complicated situation.
Instead, they embrace me still in yesterday's rumpled wedding dress and insist that Emma and Jake are their grandchildren regardless of genetics or legal documents. That man has no idea what he started, Margaret says firmly, her small frame radiating an unexpected fierceness. You don't threaten children and expect their family to just accept it quietly. As the afternoon wears on, more of Michael's extended family arrives, turning the country club's conference room into an impromptu crisis command center filled with Chens of all ages. The children among them, Michael's nieces and nephews, seem confused by the adults' tension but adapt with the resilience that children possess. Their presence reminds me painfully of Emma and Jake, probably confused and scared wherever Brian has taken them. Agent Walsh receives regular updates from the Montana surveillance team, but the news is frustratingly inconclusive. The cabin appears occupied, with a vehicle matching the description of one Brian had access to parked outside, but there's no visual confirmation of the children or even of Brian himself. The challenge with remote locations is that we can't get close enough for definitive surveillance without risking exposure, Agent Walsh explains during one of our briefings. We're working with thermal imaging and long-range observation, but we need more concrete evidence before we can move. Lisa continues working her legal contacts, reaching out to judges and prosecutors who might be able to expedite warrants or custody orders that could help in negotiation. But the reality is becoming clear, even with law enforcement resources and legal authority, finding two children hidden by someone with military training in the vast wilderness of the American West is like searching for needles in a haystack. As evening approaches, marking 24 hours since Brian's first call, my phone rings again. This time, Agent Walsh doesn't need to signal the technical team. They're already in position, recording equipment active, tracing software ready. Brian's voice sounds different this time, less performatively cheerful and more businesslike. I trust you've had time to consider my proposal, Sarah. I'm a reasonable man, willing to negotiate, but my patience isn't unlimited. Let me talk to Emma and Jake, I demand, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I need to know they're safe and unharmed before I discuss anything else. There's rustling on the other end, muffled voices, and then Emma's small voice comes through the speaker. Mom, Daddy says we're on a camping trip, but I want to come home. I miss you and Michael. The sound of my daughter's voice breaks something open in my chest, flooding me with relief that she's alive and apparently unharmed, but also with rage at Brian for putting her through this trauma. Before I can respond, Jake's voice joins his sister's. Mom, when are you coming to get us? Daddy says you had to choose between us and Michael, but that's silly. We all live together. We're a family. Out of the mouths of babes. My 6-year-old son has articulated the fundamental flaw in Brian's plan more clearly than any of the adults in this room. We are a family, Michael included, and Brian's attempt to force me to choose between my children and my husband is doomed to fail because it's based on a false premise. Emma, Jake, I love you both so much, I say, fighting to keep my voice calm for their sake. Mommy and Michael and all the family are working very hard to bring you home safely. I need you both to be brave and take care of each other, okay? We will, Mommy, Emma promises, her voice small but determined. We're being good for Daddy, but we want to come home. The line goes quiet as Brian apparently takes the phone back, and when he speaks again, his voice carries a harder edge than before. Sweet children, aren't so trusting, so dependent on their parents to keep them safe. It would be a shame if that trust was misplaced. The implied threat makes everyone in the room tense, but Agent Walsh signals me to keep him talking, to push for more information about their location and his future plan. Brian, you've made your point. You have my attention. You've disrupted my life. You've proven you can take the children whenever you want. What exactly do you want from me? I want what I've always wanted, Sarah. My family. The divorce was a mistake. A reaction to temporary problems that we could have worked through if you hadn't been so stubborn. Michael is a distraction, a rebound relationship that you've let go too far. It's time to come home. The delusion in his voice is breathtaking. After 2 years of legal battles, custody disputes, and increasingly erratic behavior, Brian still believes that our marriage ended because of my stubbornness rather than his controlling behavior and refusal to respect boundaries. The kidnapping isn't just about custody or revenge. It's about his fundamental inability to accept that our relationship is over. And if I refuse, I ask, though we both know the answer, then Emma and Jake will continue their extended camping trip with their father. There are excellent private schools in Montana, Sarah, beautiful wilderness areas where children can grow up free from the corrupting influences of modern life. I have everything I need to provide for them indefinitely. The casual way he discusses permanently relocating my children, as if their entire lives can be uprooted to serve his psychological needs, makes Michael step closer to the phone. But Agent Walsh holds up a hand, warning him not to intervene while the technical team works to trace the call. You're talking about kidnapping, Brian. Taking children across state lines, violating federal laws, destroying their relationships with everyone they know and love. That's not fatherhood, that's selfishness. I'm talking about protecting my children from a mother who puts her own desires above their well-being. You chose to remarry Sarah. You chose to bring a stranger into their lives. You chose to prioritize your happiness over family stability. I'm simply correcting those mistakes. The conversation continues for another 10 minutes. Brian alternating between threats and appeals to our shared history, while the FBI technical team works frantically to pinpoint his location. When the call finally ends, Agent Walsh immediately confers with her colleagues about the tracing results. We've got him, Agent Rodriguez announces, his voice tight with controlled excitement. The call definitely originated from the Montana cabin area. We have coordinates accurate to within a quarter mile. The breakthrough energizes everyone in the room, but Agent Walsh cautions against premature celebration. Now comes the dangerous part. We know where they are, but we still need to safely extract the children without putting them at additional risk. As FBI tactical teams in Montana prepare for what could become a rescue operation, I find myself facing the most difficult decision of my life. Brian has made his demands clear: abandon my marriage to Michael and return to him, or risk losing my children permanently. The choice he's trying to force isn't really a choice at all, but the fear of what he might do if cornered makes every option seem fraught with danger. Michael takes my hand as we watch Agent Walsh coordinate with the Montana teams, his wedding ring catching the conference room's fluorescent lights. We've been married in everything but ceremony for the past 36 hours, tested by crisis and proven stronger than Brian anticipated. Whatever happens next, we face it together, as the family that Emma and Jake recognized even when the adults couldn't see clearly. The hunting cabin in Montana represents more than just Brian's hiding place. It's the culmination of months of planning and preparation that we're only beginning to understand. As evening falls and tactical teams move into position, the real confrontation is just beginning. Brian has chosen his battlefield carefully, but he's underestimated the determination of everyone fighting to bring Emma and Jake home safely. Outside the conference room windows, the lights of Denver twinkle in the distance, each one representing families going about their normal Sunday evening routine. Somewhere in the Montana wilderness, my children are probably being put to bed by their father, unaware that their safety hangs in the balance of decisions being made hundreds of miles away. The next few hours will determine whether Brian's carefully orchestrated plan succeeds, or whether the family he's trying to destroy proves stronger than his ability to manipulate and control. The Montana sunrise casts long shadows across the FBI tactical staging area, a collection of black SUVs and communication equipment, hidden among the pine trees 3 miles from Brian's location. Agent Walsh coordinates the operation through her headset while I sit in the back of an armored vehicle, still wearing the wrinkled remains of my wedding dress, watching thermal imaging displays that show 3 heat signatures inside the remote hunting cabin. Target 1 is moving around the perimeter, reports Agent Stevens, the tactical team leader whose calm voice belies the complexity of the situation unfolding. Appears to be conducting security sweeps every 20 minutes. He's definitely applying military protocol. Michael squeezes my hand as we watch the green and orange shapes on the screen that represent my children and their captor. The smaller signatures, presumably Emma and Jake, have remained stationary for the past hour, likely still sleeping in the early morning hour. The larger signature that must be Brian moves with purpose and regularity that confirms Agent Walsh's assessment of his military training. Mrs. Torres, Agent Walsh says quietly, removing her headset to focus on me completely, I need to prepare you for what we're facing here. Your ex-husband has chosen this location strategically. The cabin is surrounded by open ground for 50 yards in every direction, giving him clear sightlines for approaching threats. There's only one access road, and he's almost certainly booby-trapped. The technical complexity of Brian's planning continues to astound and terrify me. During our marriage, I'd admired his attention to detail, his ability to think several steps ahead in any situation. Now those same qualities have turned him into an adversary that even federal law enforcement approaches with extreme caution. Lisa Rodriguez, my best friend and attorney who insisted on accompanying the FBI team, despite regulations, studies legal documents spread across a folding table. I've been reviewing Brian's military records that the Bureau obtained overnight. His specialty was counter-surveillance and evasion tactics. Sarah, he's not just hiding from us, he's prepared to fight us. Agent Rodriguez emerges from a communication tent with updates from the overnight investigation. We've identified how he's been funding this operation. 3 months ago, Brian liquidated his entire retirement account and converted everything to untraceable cryptocurrency. He's been purchasing supplies and equipment through anonymous online transactions, building a off-grid survival setup. The revelation hits me like a physical blow. Brian hasn't just taken Emma and Jake on an impulsive kidnapping, he's been planning their permanent disappearance for months, methodically preparing for exactly this scenario. Every custody hearing we attended, every mediation session where he seemed to be cooperating, he was secretly building toward this moment. There's more, Agent Rodriguez continues, his expression grim. We found evidence that he's been conducting surveillance on your daily routines. Sarah, photos of you and Michael at restaurants, Emma's school pickup schedule, detailed notes about your wedding planning timeline. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a calculated operation. Michael's jaw tightens as he processes the extent of Brian's obsession with our lives. For months, while we were building our relationship and planning our future together, Brian was watching, planning, preparing to destroy everything we were creating. The violation feels almost worse than the kidnapping itself. The good news, Agent Walsh interjects, is that his preparation also creates vulnerabilities. People who plan this extensively tend to stick to their plans, which makes their behavior predictable. The bad news is that he's clearly prepared for a siege situation. My phone begins buzzing with an incoming call, the now familiar pattern that has defined the past 2 days. Agent Walsh immediately signals the technical team while I accept the call, my hands steadier now than they were during Brian's first contact. Good morning, Sarah. I trust you slept well in whatever hotel the FBI set up for you. Brian's voice carries a smugness that makes my skin crawl, but underneath it, I detect something new, a tightness that suggests he knows law enforcement is closing in. Where did you sleep, Brian? In a tent with my frightened children while you play soldier in the woods. I've abandoned any pretense of negotiation, letting my anger fuel my responses instead of fear. His laugh sounds forced this time, lacking the casual confidence of yesterday's call. Emma and Jake are perfectly comfortable, better than comfortable actually. They're learning valuable life skills that your suburban lifestyle never could have taught them. They're learning that their father is a criminal who kidnaps children when he doesn't get his way. That's not a life skill, Brian. It's a warning about who not to trust. The silence stretches longer than usual before Brian responds, and when he does, his voice has shifted into a colder register that I remember from our worst arguments during the marriage. You've made your choice then. Rejected my reasonable offer in favor of your precious FBI boyfriend and his government thugs. Michael isn't with the FBI, I correct automatically, then realize that Brian's confusion about the law enforcement response reveals something important about his mental state. The pressure of the situation is affecting his judgment, making him see threats and conspiracies that don't exist. Don't lie to me, Sarah. I can see the tactical vehicles from here. Your software engineer boyfriend coordinated this whole response, Didn't. Probably had FBI contacts ready before I even made my first call. Agent Walsh quickly writes a note and slides it toward me. He can see our staging area. Keep him talking while we adjust positions. Brian. Michael is a civilian who's terrified for the children he loves. The FBI response has nothing to do with him, and everything to do with you, committing federal crimes. You kidnapped Emma and Jake across state lines. You violated multiple court orders. You threatened law enforcement officers. This situation escalated because of your choices, not anyone else's. Through the communication equipment, I can hear tactical teams repositioning around the cabin, trying to find concealed approaches that Brian's surveillance can't detect. The complexity of the operation grows with each passing hour, involving dozens of agents and millions of dollars in equipment, all because one man refuses to accept that his marriage ended. My choices, Brian repeats, his voice rising slightly. I chose to protect my children from a mother who abandoned them for a stranger. I chose to keep them safe from your corrupt influence and his manipulation. Everything I've done is for Emma and Jake's benefit. The delusion in his voice is complete now, any connection to reality severed by his need to justify the unjustifiable. Agent Walsh makes urgent gestures toward the technical team, who indicate they're successfully tracing the call while monitoring Brian's movements through thermal imaging. If you want to protect Emma and Jake, then bring them out safely. End this standoff before it escalates into something that truly traumatizes them. They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of your war with me. There is no war with you, Sarah. There's just a father protecting his family from people who want to destroy it. But I'm willing to be reasonable. Send Michael away. Dismiss the FBI. Come to the cabin alone, and we can discuss terms like civilized people. The suggestion is so obviously a trap that even Brian seems to realize how transparent it sounds. Agent Walsh is already shaking her head emphatically, but I find myself considering the psychological advantage of appearing to negotiate. What terms, Brian? What exactly are you proposing? Joint custody becomes primary custody for me. Emma and Jake live with their father during the school year, visit you on holidays and summers. You relocate to Montana to be close to them, and your marriage to Michael is annulled based on duress and fraud. The demands are even more extreme than yesterday's ultimatum, revealing how the pressure of law enforcement response has pushed Brian further from reality. He's not negotiating from a position of strength. He's desperately escalating his demands because he knows his position is becoming untenable, and if I refuse, then Emma and Jake discover what life is like when their mother chooses strangers over family. Montana has excellent homeschooling programs, Sarah. They'll adapt. The casual way he discusses permanently severing my children's connection to their entire lives makes Michael step closer to the phone, his presence a reminder that I'm not facing this alone, despite Brian's attempts to isolate me. You're talking about destroying their lives to satisfy your need for control. That's not protection, Brian. That's abuse. I'm talking about giving them stability and consistency instead of the chaos you've created with your selfish choices. Michael has been in their lives for 2 years, Sarah. I am their father forever. The call ends abruptly, but this time the technical team immediately confirms they've maintained the trace throughout the conversation. More importantly, the thermal imaging shows Brian moving frantically around the cabin's interior, suggesting that the conversation has agitated him significantly. He's becoming unstable, Agent Walsh observes, studying the movement patterns on her display. The reality of law enforcement pressure is breaking down his carefully constructed justifications for this action. Agent Stevens approaches from the tactical coordination area, his expression serious but focused. We've identified an approach vector that should keep us concealed until we're within 50 yards of the structure. The challenge is that he's almost certainly armed and prepared for exactly this scenario. The next several hours pass in a blur of tactical planning and psychological profiling, as the FBI team prepares for multiple contingencies. Hostage negotiation specialists arrive from Denver, bringing sophisticated communication equipment and behavioral analysis tools. The staging area transforms into a small city of law enforcement personnel, all focused on safely extracting 2 children from their father's elaborate fortress. Michael's family continues to provide support,
though the extended nature of the crisis is testing everyone's endurance. Margaret Chen insists on maintaining normal routines for the other children present, organizing activities and meals as if we're at a strange family reunion, rather than a kidnapping command center. Her calm pragmatism helps ground me when the situation threatens to become overwhelming. Sarah, she says during a quiet moment while the FBI team coordinates with Montana State Police, I want you to know something. Brian thinks he's fighting for his children, but he's actually fighting against them. Emma and Jake know who their family is, who makes them feel safe and loved. That knowledge will protect them even if this situation continues longer than any of us want. Her words provide comfort, but they also highlight the fundamental tragedy of Brian's action. In his desperation to keep our children, he's traumatizing them in ways that will affect their ability to trust and feel secure for years to come. The man who claims to be protecting them is actually inflicting the deepest possible wounds on their sense of safety and stability. Lisa approaches with her laptop, displaying financial records that the FBI has obtained through emergency court orders. We've traced more of Brian's preparation activities. 6 months ago, he started stockpiling medical supplies, non-perishable food, and camping equipment. The quantities suggest he was planning for an extended siege situation from the beginning. The evidence continues to paint a picture of a man who had convinced himself that kidnapping was not only justified, but necessary to save his children from imagined threats. Brian's military training has given him the skills to execute his plan, but his deteriorating mental state has warped his judgment about the consequences and sustainability of his actions. Agent Walsh receives a report that makes her expression darken considerably. Montana Fish and Wildlife reports that the cabin's water supply comes from a natural spring on the property. Brian doesn't need to leave for resources, and the remote location means he could potentially maintain his position indefinitely. The realization that Brian has chosen a location that could support an extended standoff changes the tactical calculations significantly. What began as a kidnapping is evolving into a hostage situation with no clear timeline for resolution, and every hour that passes increases the psychological trauma being inflicted on Emma and Jake. We need to change our approach, Agent Walsh decides after conferring with her team leaders. Direct assault risks harming the children, but allowing this to continue indefinitely also harms them. We're going to try something that requires your cooperation, Sarah. The plan Agent Walsh outlines is both simple and terrifying. I'll approach the cabin alone wearing concealed communication equipment, with the goal of negotiating face-to-face with Brian while tactical teams position themselves for a coordinated response. The FBI's behavioral analysts believe that Brian's deteriorating mental state makes him more likely to make mistakes if confronted directly by me. Absolutely not, Michael says immediately, his voice carrying an edge. I've rarely heard. You're not walking into a potentially booby-trapped area to face an armed man who's already demonstrated he's willing to commit federal crimes. Agent Walsh nods, understanding. The risks are significant, but they may be outweighed by the benefit. Brian's entire plan is based on controlling the situation from a distance. If Sarah can force him into direct confrontation, his tactical advantages decrease substantially. Lisa studies the legal implications while Agent Stevens reviews the tactical consideration. The consensus emerges that Brian's military training makes him formidable in a siege situation, but his emotional investment in his relationship with me creates exploitable vulnerability. If I do this, I say slowly, considering the implications, what happens to Emma and Jake if something goes wrong? What happens if Brian decides that he'd rather hurt all of us than lose control? The question hangs in the air without easy answer. Every option involves risks to my children's safety, but continuing the current standoff also means prolonging their trauma and giving Brian more time to further destabilize psychologically. Agent Walsh receives an urgent communication through her headset, her expression immediately shifting to high alert. We have movement in the cabin. Thermal imaging shows all 3 signatures congregating in the main room. Brian appears to be. He's showing the children something. The thermal display shows the 3 figures clustered around what might be a table or desk, their positions suggesting some kind of group activity. Agent Stevens immediately coordinates with surveillance teams, positioned at various distances from the cabin, trying to determine what Brian might be doing with Emma and Jake. Audio surveillance is picking up voices, but we can't make out specific words through the cabin's construction, Agent Rodriguez reports. The activity level suggests he's engaged in some kind of instruction or demonstration with the children. The possibilities of what Brian might be teaching Emma and Jake send ice through my veins. His military background includes training in weapons, survival tactics, and evasion techniques that could be extremely dangerous if passed on to children in a high-stress situation. My phone rings again, the by now familiar sound that has marked every escalation in this crisis. Agent Walsh immediately signals for recording and tracing while I accept the call, steeling myself for whatever new development Brian has planned. Sarah, I want you to talk to Emma and Jake. They have something important to tell you. Brian's voice carries a different quality this time, almost ceremonial, as if he's orchestrating some kind of performance. Emma's voice comes through the speaker, but something about her tone seems coached, rehearsed in a way that makes my maternal instincts scream warnings. Mommy, Daddy has been teaching us about family loyalty and making hard choices. He says that sometimes children have to choose between their parents when adults can't agree. The manipulation is breathtaking in its cruelty. Brian is forcing my 8-year-old daughter to participate in his psychological warfare, using her love for both parents as a weapon against everyone involved. Before I can respond, Jake's voice joins his sister. Mom, Daddy says that if you really love us, you'll come here by yourself and we can all talk about being a family again. He says Michael doesn't understand about family because he's not really our dad. The coached nature of their statements is obvious to every adult listening, but the content reveals the depth of Brian's psychological manipulation. He's not just holding Emma and Jake physically, he's actively working to reprogram their understanding of their family relationships and their mother's motivations. Emma, Jake, I love you both more than anything in the world, I say, fighting to keep my voice calm for their sake. Nothing will ever change that love, no matter what anyone tells you. Mommy and Michael and all our family are working very hard to bring you home safely. Brian's voice returns to the call, carrying a satisfaction that makes my skin crawl. You hear that, children? Mommy mentions Michael before she mentions bringing you home. That tells us everything we need to know about her priorities. The psychological torture is systematic and deliberate, designed to undermine Emma and Jake's trust in me while reinforcing Brian's narrative that he's protecting them from my selfishness. The damage being inflicted on their developing understanding of love, family, and trust may take years to repair. Brian, you're traumatizing our children to satisfy your own psychological needs. This isn't protection, it's abuse, and you know it. I'm teaching them valuable lessons about loyalty and family priorities that your lifestyle choices never could. They're learning to see through manipulation and recognize who truly has their best interests at heart. The projection in his statement is complete. Brian has convinced himself that his systematic manipulation of our children's emotional well-being is actually teaching them to recognize manipulation. The psychological gymnastics required to maintain such delusions suggest that his mental state has deteriorated beyond rational negotiation. Bring them out, Brian. End this before you inflict permanent damage on the children you claim to love. The damage was inflicted when you chose strangers over family, Sarah. I'm simply helping Emma and Jake understand the reality of their situation and make informed decisions about their future. The call ends with Brian's usual abruptness, but this time the thermal imaging shows increased activity around the cabin. All three figures are moving more frequently, and Agent Stevens reports observing what appears to be preparation activities through long-range surveillance. He's escalating, Agent Walsh concludes after reviewing the behavioral analysis reports. The direct involvement of the children in his psychological campaign suggests he's preparing for some kind of endgame scenario. The FBI team immediately shifts into accelerated planning mode, coordinating with tactical units while preparing for multiple contingencies. The evidence suggests that Brian's carefully constructed plan is beginning to unravel under the pressure of law enforcement response, making him increasingly unpredictable and potentially dangerous. As the Montana afternoon sun begins its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the staging area, I make the decision that I've been avoiding since this crisis began. Brian has chosen his battlefield and his tactics, but he's made one critical miscalculation. He thinks I'll sacrifice my relationship with Michael to protect Emma and Jake, not understanding that our family's strength comes from all of us together, not from the divisions he's trying to create. The approaching confrontation will test every assumption Brian has made about my motivations and priorities.
He spent months planning for a mother who would abandon her new husband to save her children, not realizing that the family he's trying to destroy has become something stronger than his ability to manipulate and control. Whatever happens in the next few hours, Emma and Jake will learn the truth about family loyalty, but it won't be the lesson Brian is trying to teach. They'll see that real love doesn't require choosing sides, that true protection comes from people willing to risk everything for each other's safety, and that the bonds between people who choose to be family can be stronger than those based on genetics or legal documents. The final phase of Brian's plan is about to begin, but he's underestimated the determination of everyone fighting to bring our children home safely. The man who thinks he's protecting Emma and Jake from corruption is about to discover that the family he's trying to destroy is more resilient than his ability to tear it apart. The tactical briefing tent buzzes with controlled urgency as Agent Walsh outlines the final approach plan to a dozen federal agents, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops displaying satellite imagery and thermal readings. I stand at the edge of the circle, still wearing the now tattered remnants of what should have been my wedding dress, feeling like an actress who's wandered onto the wrong movie set. The surreal nature of coordinating a federal rescue operation while dressed for a ceremony that never happened captures the complete upheaval Brian has orchestrated in our lives. Primary objective remains child safety, Agent Walsh emphasizes, her pointer tracing routes on the digital map. Secondary objective is peaceful resolution without loss of life. Tertiary objective is gathering evidence for prosecution. Mrs. Torres will approach from the east access road while teams Alpha and Bravo establish containment positions along the tree line. Michael steps closer to me, his presence both comforting and anxiety-inducing as we face the reality that I'm about to walk directly into Brian's carefully prepared stronghold. His wedding tuxedo has been replaced by civilian tactical gear provided by the FBI, making him look more like a concerned father preparing for the worst than a software engineer who just wanted to marry the woman he loves. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," he says for perhaps the 20th time since Agent Walsh outlined the plan. "There have to be other options that don't involve you becoming a target yourself." Agent Stevens approaches from the communications array, his expression carrying the weight of difficult news. "We've intercepted radio communications from the cabin area. Brian is using military-grade encryption, but our analysts have identified pattern changes that suggest he's preparing for imminent action. Whatever he's planning, it's happening soon." The revelation accelerates everyone's sense of urgency. Brian's military training has served him well in creating a defensible position, but it's also made him predictable in ways that experienced law enforcement can exploit. His adherence to tactical protocols means that his behavior follows recognizable patterns, even when his judgment has been compromised by psychological instability. Lisa Rodriguez emerges from a secure communication vehicle where she's been coordinating with federal prosecutors about the legal framework surrounding our rescue operation. "I've got emergency custody orders from 3 different jurisdictions. The moment Emma and Jake are secure, Brian loses any claim to legal access. His actions over the past 48 hours have terminated his parental rights in the eyes of every court with jurisdiction." The legal vindication provides some comfort, but it also highlights the permanent damage Brian has inflicted on his relationship with our children. Even if he somehow avoids lengthy federal prison sentences, Emma and Jake will grow up knowing that their father was willing to traumatize them to satisfy his need for control. The psychological scars from this experience will affect their ability to trust and feel secure for years to come. Margaret Chen approaches from the family coordination area, where Michael's relatives have established an impromptu support network for everyone affected by the crisis. The children's belongings are packed and ready for transport to Denver. We've also arranged for child psychologists to be available as soon as they're released. The practical preparations for Emma and Jake's recovery underscore the reality that their rescue is only the beginning of their healing process. They've spent 3 days in an environment of manipulation and psychological pressure that would challenge adult coping mechanisms. Helping them process the experience and rebuild their sense of safety will require patience, professional guidance, and unconditional love from everyone in their support network. Agent Walsh receives an update through her headset that makes her expression shift to high alert. Surveillance reports movement around the cabin's perimeter. Brian appears to be conducting final security sweeps and possibly setting additional defensive measures. We need to move before he completes whatever preparations he's making. The final equipment check feels like preparing for surgery or a space launch, every detail scrutinized to ensure nothing goes wrong during the critical moments ahead. I'm fitted with concealed communication equipment, GPS tracking devices, and protective gear disguised to look like normal clothing. The technical sophistication of modern law enforcement operations amazes me, but it also emphasizes the dangerous nature of what we're attempting. Remember, Agent Walsh says during the final briefing, your goal is to keep Brian talking while remaining as far from the cabin as possible. Do not attempt to approach the building or make any sudden movement. Our teams will be monitoring every word and ready to respond immediately if the situation deteriorates. Michael embraces me before I leave the staging area, his touch conveying everything that words cannot express about the risks we're facing and the future we're fighting to protect. Emma and Jake are going to come home safely, he whispers against my ear, and then we're going to have the wedding they deserve to witness, surrounded by people who love all of. The walk from the FBI staging area to the access road leading toward Brian's cabin feels like crossing into another world, leaving behind the safety of law enforcement protection and entering the domain that my ex-husband has spent months preparing to defend. The Montana wilderness around me is breathtakingly beautiful, tall pines stretching toward a crystalline blue sky that seems to mock the ugly human drama playing out beneath it. Agent Walsh's voice crackles through my concealed earpiece as I approach the halfway point between the staging area and the cabin. Thermal imaging shows all 3 targets stationary inside the main room. Brian appears to be positioned near a window with clear sight lines toward your approach route. Maintain steady pace and casual demeanor. The knowledge that Brian is watching my approach through military-grade optics makes every step feel deliberate and exposed. He's chosen this confrontation as carefully as everything else, forcing me to come to him on terrain he's prepared and controlled, but his need to orchestrate every detail of the situation may also provide the psychological opening that FBI negotiators are hoping to exploit. My phone begins ringing when I'm still 200 yards from the cabin, Brian's timing precise enough to suggest he's been monitoring my approach through sophisticated surveillance equipment. The voice that greets me when I answer carries a satisfaction that makes my blood run cold, but underneath it I detect the strain of a man whose carefully constructed plan is approaching its climax. Sarah, how thoughtful of you to dress appropriately for our reunion, though I have to say, your wedding dress has seen better days. The casual cruelty in his observation about my appearance reveals how completely he's embraced his role as the orchestrator of my suffering. Where are Emma and Jake, Brian? I want to see them before we discuss anything else. I keep walking toward the cabin while speaking, following the FBI's instructions to maintain forward progress until Brian specifically tells me to stop. Our children are safe and comfortable, learning valuable lessons about loyalty and family priority. They'll join us for the final phase of our conversation, but first you and I need to establish some ground rules for your behavior. The possessive way he refers to Emma and Jake as our children while simultaneously using them as leverage against me encapsulates the fundamental contradiction in his thinking. Brian genuinely believes he's protecting them while actively traumatizing them for his own psychological gratification. The only ground rule I need is proof that Emma and Jake are unharmed and ready to come home with me immediately. I continue walking, the cabin now clearly visible through the trees. A rustic structure that would be charming under different circumstances but now represents the epicenter of my family's worst nightmare. Brian's laugh carries an edge that suggests his mental state has deteriorated further since yesterday's communications. You're hardly in a position to make demands, Sarah. You're walking alone into a situation I've controlled from the beginning, surrounded by federal agents who are powerless to protect you if I decide you've become a threat to my children's well-being. Agent Walsh's voice whispers through my earpiece, maintain conversation but do not approach closer than 50 yards to the cabin. We're detecting possible defensive measures around the perimeter. The warning makes me more conscious of my footing as I navigate the forest path, watching for signs of the booby traps or early warning systems that Brian's military training would have taught him to install. Every step could trigger an alarm or worse, putting both my safety and the rescue operation at risk. Brian, I'm here because you demanded that I come alone. I've met your conditions. Now meet mine. Let me see Emma and Jake so I know they're safe, and then we can discuss whatever terms you think are reasonable. The cabin door opens as I reach the 50-yard perimeter Agent Walsh specified, and my heart nearly stops as Emma and Jake emerge onto the front porch. They look physically unharmed but obviously confused and scared, their eyes wide as they spot me approaching through the trees. Emma wears the same dress she had on for the wedding ceremony that never happened, now wrinkled and stained from 3 days in the wilderness. Jake clutches a stuffed animal I don't recognize, probably something Brian provided to comfort him during their camping trip. "Mommy!" Emma calls out, starting to run toward me before Brian's sharp command stops her in her tracks. The way she immediately freezes and steps back reveals how completely he's dominated their environment through fear and control. "Emma, Jake, stay exactly where you are," Brian orders, his military authority voice cutting through the mountain air. "Mommy and Daddy need to have an adult conversation before anyone moves anywhere." The sight of my children so close but untouchable fills me with a maternal rage that threatens to override every tactical instruction the FBI has given me. Every instinct screams at me to run to them, to gather them into my arms and shield them from further psychological damage, but the knowledge that Brian is armed and prepared for exactly that reaction keeps me frozen at the tree line. "They look scared, Brian. Whatever message you're trying to send me, you've sent it. Let them go back inside while we talk so they don't have to witness whatever you're planning to do next." Brian emerges from the cabin carrying what appears to be a hunting rifle, his movements confident and practiced in a way that suggests he's been preparing for armed confrontation from the beginning. The weapon isn't pointed at me or the children, but its presence transforms the situation from a psychological standoff into something far more dangerous. "Emma and Jake need to hear this conversation, Sarah, because it affects their future directly. They need to understand the choices their mother is making, and the consequences of prioritizing strangers over family." Agent Walsh's voice in my earpiece carries controlled urgency. "Armed subject confirmed. Do not approach any closer. Maintain dialogue while tactical teams adjust positions for child safety." The next few minutes unfold like a nightmare choreographed by someone with intimate knowledge of my deepest fear. Brian positions himself between me and the children, using their presence as both shield and psychological leverage, while outlining his demands for our family's future. "Here's what's going to happen," he announces, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his orders followed without question. "You're going to call your FBI friends and tell them you've decided to resolve this family matter privately. They're going to withdraw to a safe distance while you, Emma, Jake and I work out our new custody arrangement." The delusion in his plan is breathtaking. Brian genuinely believes that he can negotiate his way out of federal kidnapping charges through manipulation and threats, that law enforcement will simply abandon a child rescue operation because he's made demands, and if I refuse, I ask, though we both know the answer involves the rifle he's carrying and the children he's positioned himself to control. Then Emma and Jake learn a very difficult lesson about what happens when mothers choose their own happiness over their children's safety. Montana has excellent wilderness areas where families can disappear completely if they need to start over somewhere new. The casual way he discusses permanently relocating our children to avoid law enforcement sends ice through my veins. Brian isn't just threatening to continue the kidnapping, he's prepared to take Emma and Jake completely off the grid, severing their connections to everyone they've ever known except him. Michael's voice suddenly crackles through my earpiece, patched through by Agent Walsh in violation of every tactical protocol. "Sarah, Emma, Jake, if you can hear me, I want you to know that we love you and we're bringing you home safely. Nothing anyone says or does will change that love or break up our family." Brian's reaction to hearing Michael's voice broadcast across his supposedly secure communication channel is immediate and violent. He raises the rifle, pointing it in my general direction while screaming threats and demands that reveal how completely his careful planning has unraveled. "Tell your boyfriend to shut his mouth before I demonstrate exactly what happens to people who interfere with family business." The loss of control in Brian's voice signals the beginning of the endgame that FBI negotiators have been preparing for. Agent Walsh's tactical command echoes through my earpiece. "All units, Target is armed and agitated. Prepare for immediate intervention on my signal. Mrs. Torres, move away from the cabin area immediately. But as I start to back away from the confrontation, Emma breaks free from Brian's control and runs toward me, her 8-year-old determination overriding her fear of her father's anger. Mommy, I want to go home. I want to see Michael and Grandma Margaret and sleep in my own bed. Brian's attempt to stop Emma's escape puts him in motion away from his defensive position, creating the opening that tactical teams have been waiting for. The next 30 seconds unfold with the precision and speed of a military operation, federal agents emerging from concealed positions, while Brian realizes that his carefully prepared stronghold has been compromised from multiple directions. The confrontation ends not with dramatic gunfire or extended negotiation, but with Brian's sudden collapse into sobbing acceptance of his complete defeat. Surrounded by federal agents and faced with the impossibility of his situation, he surrenders both his weapon and his delusions about controlling our family's future. Emma and Jake run into my arms as FBI agents secure Brian and begin processing the crime scene he's created, their small bodies trembling against mine as months of planning and days of terror finally end in the safety they've been denied since their father decided that love could be expressed through kidnapping and manipulation. Agent Walsh approaches as I hold my children, her expression carrying both professional satisfaction and personal relief that the operation concluded without loss of life. Mrs. Torres, medical personnel need to examine Emma and Jake before we transport them back to Denver. Child services specialists are also standing by to begin assessment of their psychological welfare. The next several hours pass in a blur of medical examinations, FBI debriefings, and coordination with federal prosecutors about the charges Brian will face for his elaborate kidnapping operation. Emma and Jake remain close to me throughout the process, their trust gradually returning as they realize they're truly safe from their father's psychological manipulation. Michael arrives at the Montana field office as federal agents complete their initial interviews with the children, his relief at seeing us all together finally allowing him to show the emotional strain he's carried throughout the crisis. Emma immediately runs to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist as she seeks comfort from the man Brian tried to convince her was a threat to their family. Michael, Daddy told us you didn't really love us because we weren't your real children, Emma says, her voice small but determined to tell the truth about her experience. But I knew he was lying because real dads don't make kids choose between their parents. The wisdom in my 8-year-old daughter's observation captures everything that Brian failed to understand about family, love, and the bonds that truly matter. His obsession with genetics and legal documents blinded him to the reality that Emma and Jake already knew. Family is defined by care, consistency, and choosing to love someone every day, not by DNA or court order. Jake, exhausted from 3 days of confusion and manipulation, falls asleep against Michael's shoulder as we wait for clearance to return to Denver. His complete trust in the man Brian tried to paint as an enemy reveals how thoroughly my ex-husband's psychological campaign failed to achieve its intended goal. The federal prosecutor who meets with us explains the extensive charges Brian will face: kidnapping across state lines, violation of federal court orders, weapons violations, and child endangerment, among others. The combined sentences could result in decades of imprisonment, effectively ending any possibility of his involvement in Emma and Jake's lives until they're adults. Ms. Torres, the prosecutor says during our briefing, your ex-husband's actions represent one of the most elaborate domestic kidnapping operations we've encountered. His military training and months of preparation created a situation that required significant federal resources to resolve safely. The flight back to Denver takes place in a private aircraft provided by the FBI, allowing Emma and Jake to decompress from their ordeal without media attention or public scrutiny. They sleep for most of the journey, their small bodies finally relaxing after days of stress and uncertainty. Lisa meets us at the Denver airport with a convoy of family members whose relief at seeing Emma and Jake safe creates an impromptu celebration in the private terminal. Margaret and Robert Chen embrace all of us as if we've returned from a war zone, which in many ways, we have. The media attention has been significant, Lisa reports as we transfer to waiting vehicles. The story of a wedding day kidnapping has captured national attention,
but we've managed to keep Emma and Jake's identities protected through court order. The ride home through familiar Denver neighborhoods feels surreal after the Montana wilderness, where our family's future hung in the balance. Emma and Jake point out recognizable landmarks with excitement, their joy at returning to normal surroundings, a positive sign for their psychological recovery. Our house in Lakewood appears exactly as we left it 3 days ago, but everything feels different after the trauma we've endured. The backyard playground where Jake and Michael built their treehouse represents the stable, loving environment that Brian tried to destroy through his elaborate manipulation. Patricia Hendricks, the child psychologist Margaret arranged, meets with Emma and Jake individually to begin assessing their emotional state and developing strategies for processing their experience. Her initial evaluation suggests that while they've been affected by Brian's psychological manipulation, their fundamental sense of security and family identity remained intact throughout the ordeal. Children are remarkably resilient, Hendricks explains during her consultation with Michael and me. Emma and Jake clearly understood that their father's behavior was wrong, even when they were too frightened to resist openly. Their attachment to both of you actually protected them from the worst psychological effects of his manipulation. The next several weeks unfold in a careful balance between normalcy and healing, as we help Emma and Jake process their experience, while rebuilding the sense of safety that Brian's actions shattered. They return to school with special counseling support, resume their activities and friendships, and gradually begin talking about their camping trip with Daddy in terms that reveal their growing understanding of what actually happened. Michael and I finally have our wedding ceremony 6 weeks after the original date, in a small gathering of immediate family in our backyard. Emma and Jake serve as flower girl and ring bearer just as originally planned, their participation in our marriage celebration, marking their complete acceptance of our family structure that Brian tried so desperately to destroy. The ceremony itself is simple and intimate, lacking the elaborate planning and formal elegance of our originally scheduled celebration. But the vows we exchange carry weight and meaning that our first attempt could never have achieved, spoken by two people who have proven their commitment to each other and to our children under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Brian's trial takes place 8 months later, a legal proceeding that serves as the final chapter in his attempt to control our family's destiny. The evidence against him is overwhelming: recorded phone calls, FBI surveillance footage, testimony from Emma and Jake about their experience, and physical evidence from his elaborate kidnapping operation. His conviction on multiple federal charges results in a 25-year prison sentence, effectively ending his involvement in our children's lives until they're adults capable of making their own decisions about contact with their father. The judge's comments during sentencing acknowledged the sophisticated nature of his planning, while condemning the psychological damage inflicted on children he claimed to love. Emma and Jake testify through closed-circuit video, their composed and articulate descriptions of their experience demonstrating their remarkable resilience and recovery. They express sadness about their father's choices, while clearly stating their desire to continue living with Michael and me as a complete family unit. The trial receives significant media attention as an example of how domestic custody disputes can escalate into federal crimes when one parent refuses to accept court decisions and family boundaries. Legal experts use Brian's case to illustrate the importance of early intervention in situations where divorced parents show signs of psychological instability or obsessive behavior. 2 years after the kidnapping, Emma and Jake have largely processed their traumatic experience with their father, though they occasionally ask questions about why Daddy made such bad choices, and whether he might someday understand that families can't be forced to love each other through fear and manipulation. Michael officially adopts both children through legal proceedings that Brian does not contest from prison, creating the permanent legal bonds that reflect the emotional reality of our family relationship. Emma and Jake enthusiastically participate in the adoption ceremony, their joy at officially becoming Chuns marking their complete integration into our extended family network. The Chen Family Foundation, which Michael manages as part of his software engineering work, establishes a program providing support services for families affected by domestic kidnapping and custody-related crime. Our experience with the FBI and federal court system revealed significant gaps in resources available to help children and families recover from such traumatic experience. Emma, now 10 years old, occasionally mentions wanting to write a letter to her father in prison, expressing both forgiveness for his actions and firm boundaries about her own life choices. Her emotional maturity in processing such complex feelings amazes the therapists who continue to monitor her psychological development. Jake, 8 years old and thriving in school, shows no lasting effects from his father's psychological manipulation, his sunny disposition and trusting nature fully restored through consistent love and security. His relationship with Michael has evolved into the authentic father-son bond that Brian tried to prevent through his possessive behavior. Our marriage has been strengthened rather than damaged by the crisis that began on our wedding day, the shared experience of fighting for our family's survival creating an unshakable foundation for our partnership. We've learned that love isn't just an emotion or commitment, it's a choice that must be made repeatedly, especially when facing challenges that test every assumption about family loyalty and protection. The lessons Emma and Jake learned during their father's kidnapping attempt weren't the ones Brian intended to teach. Instead of learning to distrust outsiders and prioritize genetic relationships, they discovered that real families are built through daily choices to care for each other, that love multiplies rather than diminishes when shared with additional people, and that true protection comes from people willing to risk everything for each other's safety and happiness. Brian's elaborate plan to destroy our family and reclaim his children ultimately strengthened every bond he tried to break, proving that relationships built on choice, consistency, and unconditional love are more resilient than those based on possession, control, and genetic connection. His attempt to teach Emma and Jake about family loyalty succeeded, but not in the way he intended. They learned that loyalty means supporting each other through difficult times, not demanding exclusive devotion that excludes others who offer love and care. 5 years after the kidnapping, Emma and Jake are thriving teenagers who occasionally discuss their father's choices with the wisdom of young people who have experienced both the destructive power of obsessive love and the healing strength of healthy family relationships. They understand that Brian's actions came from his own psychological wounds rather than genuine care for their well-being, and they've chosen to focus their emotional energy on the people who consistently demonstrate love through supportive actions rather than controlling behavior. Our family's story has become part of law enforcement training programs about domestic kidnapping cases, helping federal agents understand the psychological dynamics that can escalate custody disputes into federal crime. The tactical approaches developed during Emma and Jake's rescue have been refined and applied to similar situations, potentially saving other families from experiencing the trauma we endured. Michael and I sometimes discuss the alternate timeline where Brian's kidnapping succeeded, where fear and manipulation drove us apart instead of bringing us closer together. The contemplation of how different our lives could have been serves as a reminder to never take for granted the daily choices that maintain our family's strength and happiness. Emma recently asked whether she should feel guilty about being happy that her father is in prison, expressing the complex emotions that arise when someone you love becomes someone you need protection from. Our conversations about forgiveness, boundaries, and the difference between loving someone and accepting harmful behavior continue to evolve as she matures and develops her own understanding of healthy relationships. Jake has shown interest in law enforcement careers, inspired by the FBI agents who rescued him and Emma from their father's psychological manipulation. His desire to help other families facing similar crises demonstrates how traumatic experiences can be transformed into motivation for service and protection of others. The wedding dress I wore during the kidnapping crisis now hangs in our closet as a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to fight for the people and relationships that truly matter.
The stains and tears in the fabric tell the story of 3 days that tested everything we believed about family, love, and commitment, ultimately proving that bonds built on choice and daily care are stronger than those based on genetics or legal documents. Our family's journey from that shattered wedding day to our current happiness illustrates the resilience of love when faced with hatred, the power of choice over genetics in defining family relationships, and the importance of never allowing fear to prevent us from protecting the people we care about most. Brian's attempt to control our destiny through violence and manipulation ultimately freed us to build something stronger than anything he could have destroyed. The fake DNA test results arrive exactly 47 hours after Brian first took Emma and Jake, delivered not through official channels but via a text message containing laboratory documents that look authentic enough to fool anyone not specifically trained to detect forgery. Agent Walsh examines the papers with the kind of professional skepticism that comes from years of investigating elaborate deception schemes, her expression darkening as she identifies the multiple red flags that reveal the document's fraudulent nature. "This is sophisticated work," she observes, comparing the fake results to genuine laboratory paperwork obtained from the FBI's forensic document specialists. The letterhead, formatting, and even the security watermarks have been replicated with professional-grade equipment. Your ex-husband either has access to high-level counterfeiting resources, or he's been planning this psychological operation for much longer than we initially suspected. The implications of Brian's ability to produce convincing fake evidence extend far beyond the immediate crisis. If he can fabricate laboratory results that fool casual inspection, what other false documentation might he have prepared to support his kidnapping operation? Driver's licenses, custody papers, medical records. The possibilities for ongoing deception seem limitless. Michael studies the fraudulent test results with the analytical mindset of someone accustomed to debugging complex software problems. His finger tracing the subtle inconsistencies that betray the document's artificial origin. The font spacing is wrong in the signature block and the batch numbers don't follow the standard laboratory coding system. He's good, but not perfect. Lisa Rodriguez arrives at the FBI command center carrying legal documents that provide additional context for Brian's psychological warfare campaign. "I've been reviewing court records from similar custody cases involving military personnel with specialized training. There's a pattern of escalating manipulation tactics that almost always includes fabricated evidence designed to undermine the targeted parent's credibility. The revelation that Brian's actions follow a recognizable pattern provides some comfort, suggesting that his behavior, while sophisticated, isn't entirely unprecedented in the experience of federal law enforcement. But it also means that his psychological manipulation of Emma and Jake has been guided by proven techniques for breaking down children's trust in their primary caregivers. Agent Rodriguez approaches from the communication array with an urgent update that immediately captures everyone's attention. "We've intercepted radio transmissions from the cabin indicating that Brian is preparing to move the children to a secondary location. The thermal imaging shows increased activity around what appears to be a vehicle staging area behind the main structure. The possibility that Brian might relocate Emma and Jake before the FBI can execute their rescue operation sends a wave of panic through everyone involved in the coordination effort. Every hour that passes increases the children's psychological trauma while expanding the geographic area that law enforcement must monitor for their safety." "How much time do we have?" Agent Walsh asks her training, allowing her to maintain professional composure despite the urgency of the situation unfolding. "Based on the activity patterns, probably less than 2 hours before he attempts to move. We need to accelerate our timeline significantly or risk losing them entirely." The accelerated timeline forces immediate decisions about tactical approaches that were supposed to be carefully planned and rehearsed. Agent Stevens coordinates with his tactical teams while FBI negotiators prepare for the possibility that direct confrontation may be unavoidable to prevent Brian from successfully relocating the children. Margaret Chen approaches me with a practical observation that cuts through the tactical complexity surrounding our rescue planning. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what Emma said during Brian's last phone call, about wanting to come home and sleep in her own bed. Children that age don't usually focus on specific comfort items unless they're feeling particularly insecure or threatened." Her maternal insight provides a crucial reminder that while we're coordinating federal operations and analyzing psychological profiles, Emma and Jake are experiencing this crisis as frightened children who want nothing more than to return to the safety and predictability of their normal routine. My phone begins ringing with another call from Brian, the timing suggesting that he's aware of law enforcement's closing position and preparing for whatever final confrontation he's planning. Agent Walsh immediately signals the recording equipment, while I prepare myself for what might be our last communication before the tactical teams move into action. Sarah, I hope you've had time to review the laboratory results I sent. Brian's voice carries a smugness that makes my skin crawl. But underneath it, I can detect the strain of someone whose carefully constructed plan is approaching its conclusion. I think you'll find them quite illuminating regarding the true nature of your relationship with Michael and his commitment to children who aren't genetically his own. The casual way he references the fabricated DNA results as if they represent legitimate evidence demonstrates how completely Brian has lost touch with reality. His ability to maintain detailed delusions while executing complex tactical operations suggests a level of psychological compartmentalization that makes him particularly dangerous and unpredictable. Those results are fake, Brian, and we both know it. The FBI has already confirmed that the laboratory you claim performed the testing was closed for renovations during the dates on your paperwork. I let my voice carry the certainty of someone who has professional confirmation of his deception. The silence that follows my statement stretches longer than usual, suggesting that Brian hadn't anticipated having his fabricated evidence challenged so directly. When he responds, his voice has shifted into a colder register that I recognize from our worst arguments during the marriage. Always the skeptic, aren't you, Sarah? Even when presented with scientific evidence that confirms what everyone has suspected about your children's paternity, you choose to believe government conspiracies rather than accept uncomfortable truths about your lifestyle choices. Agent Walsh writes a note and slides it toward me. Keep him talking about the fake results. His defensive responses may reveal additional details about his planning process. Brian, the uncomfortable truth is that you've kidnapped our children and fabricated evidence to support delusions about our family relationships. Emma and Jake know who their father is, just like they know who their family is. Your psychological manipulation isn't changing those fundamental realities. Their father is the man who's protecting them from a mother who prioritizes strangers over her own children's welfare. I'm giving Emma and Jake the stability and security that your selfish choices have denied them. Through the FBI communication equipment, I can hear Agent Stevens coordinating with tactical teams who are moving into final positions around Brian's location. The convergence of law enforcement resources represents the culmination of 48 hours of careful planning, but the ultimate success depends on executing the rescue without triggering whatever final desperate action Brian might attempt. If you want to give them stability and security, then end this standoff peacefully, bring Emma and Jake out safely, surrender to federal agents, and let our children begin healing from the trauma you've inflicted on them. Brian's laugh carries an edge of hysteria that suggests his mental state has deteriorated significantly since the beginning of this crisis. The trauma, Sarah, was inflicted when you chose to destroy our family by bringing a stranger into their lives. I'm simply correcting that mistake and giving them the opportunity to grow up in an environment free from your corrupting influence. Agent Walsh receives an urgent communication through her headset that makes her expression shift to high alert. Thermal imaging shows the children being moved toward the rear of the cabin. Brian appears to be preparing for immediate departure. The knowledge that Emma and Jake are being actively relocated within Brian's compound while I'm still on the phone with him creates a surreal sense of helplessness. I can hear my children somewhere in the background of our conversation, probably confused and frightened as their father prepares for whatever final act he's planned for this crisis. Brian, let me talk to Emma and Jake one more time before you do anything irreversible. They need to hear their mother's voice, to know that I love them, and that everything is going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay, Sarah, but not in the way you're imagining. Emma and Jake are about to begin a new chapter of their lives, one where they're protected from the chaos and instability that your choices have created. The ominous nature of his statement, combined with the tactical intelligence about the children being moved, suggests that Brian is preparing for some kind of final confrontation that he believes will permanently resolve the custody dispute in his favor. His military training and months of preparation have given him the skills to create a crisis that challenges even federal law enforcement resources. Agent Walsh makes urgent hand signals toward Agent Stevens, who immediately begins coordinating what appears to be an accelerated tactical response. The careful planning and gradual approach that characterized the FBI's initial strategy has been abandoned in favor of immediate action to prevent Brian from successfully relocating the children. Sarah, I want you to understand something important, Brian continues, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality that makes my blood run cold. The choices you've made over the past 2 years have consequences that extend beyond your own happiness. Emma and Jake deserve better than a mother who puts her romantic relationships ahead of their stability and security. The psychological projection in his statement is complete. Brian has convinced himself that his kidnapping and manipulation represent protection while my attempts to build a stable, loving family environment constitute selfishness and neglect. The depth of his delusion makes rational negotiation impossible, leaving law enforcement with limited options for peaceful resolution. The only person putting children at risk is you, Brian. You've traumatized Emma and Jake, violated federal laws, and created a situation where armed law enforcement officers are surrounding your location. Those aren't the actions of a protective father. They're the actions of someone who's lost touch with reality. Through my earpiece, I can hear Agent Walsh coordinating with tactical teams, while simultaneously monitoring Brian's radio communications from the cabin. The multi-layered nature of the law enforcement response demonstrates both the seriousness of the threat and the extensive resources being devoted to ensuring Emma and Jake's safe recovery. Reality, Sarah, is that I'm the only person in this situation who's consistently put our children's welfare ahead of personal desires. You chose to remarry, to bring a stranger into their lives, to prioritize your own happiness over family stability. I'm simply correcting those mistakes before they cause permanent damage to Emma and Jake's development. Agent Stevens approaches Agent Walsh with an update that makes both of them immediately focus on their tactical display. Through their body language and urgent whispered communications, I can tell that the situation at the cabin has escalated beyond the parameters of their original rescue plan. Brian, whatever you're planning to do next, remember that Emma and Jake will be affected by your choices for the rest of their lives. They're going to remember this experience, remember how their father made them feel unsafe and scared, remember the moment when their childhood sense of security was destroyed by the person who was supposed to protect. The appeal to his concern for the children's long-term psychological welfare produces another extended silence, during which I can hear muffled voices and movement in the background of our phone connection. When Brian responds, his voice carries a finality that suggests our conversation is approaching its conclusion. Emma and Jake will remember that their father was willing to do whatever was necessary to protect them from a corrupt environment. They'll understand, when they're older, that sometimes love requires making difficult choices that others don't appreciate or understand. Agent Walsh scribbles an urgent note and shows it to me. Tactical teams report visual contact with the children. Brian appears to be preparing to leave the cabin through a rear exit. Maintain conversation for 30 more seconds. The knowledge that FBI agents can actually see Emma and Jake provides the first genuine hope I've felt since this crisis began. But it also means that the next few minutes will determine whether Brian's elaborate plan succeeds or whether our family can begin the long process of healing from the trauma he's inflicted. Brian, you have one last opportunity to end this peacefully. Walk out of that cabin with Emma and Jake, surrender to federal agents, and let our children go home where they belong. You can still choose to be remembered as a father who ultimately did the right thing instead of someone who destroyed his family through obsession and control. The right thing, Sarah, is protecting our children from people who would use them as accessories to their own happiness, rather than cherishing them as the center of family life. I've spent my adult life serving my country and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. That service doesn't end just because you've decided to prioritize strangers over family. The twisted logic that allows Brian to frame kidnapping and psychological manipulation as patriotic service reveals how completely he's rationalized his criminal behavior. His military background, once a source of pride and security for our family, has become the foundation for elaborate justifications for actions that any objective observer would recognize as harmful and illegal. Agent Walsh receives a communication that makes her immediately signal Agent Stevens for final tactical coordination. Through the efficient, quiet movements of law enforcement personnel around me, I can tell that the rescue operation is transitioning from planning to execution, with all the risks and opportunities that active intervention represents. Sarah, our conversation ends here, Brian announces with military formality. Emma and Jake are about to begin their new lives, free from the corrupting influences that have threatened their development. I hope someday you'll understand that everything I've done has been motivated by love for our children and concern for their welfare. The line goes dead just as Agent Walsh signals tactical teams for immediate action, the convergence of law enforcement resources, representing the culmination of 48 hours of careful planning and preparation. Through the communication equipment, I can hear multiple teams coordinating their approach to the cabin while helicopter support provides aerial surveillance of the surrounding wilderness. Michael appears beside me as we watch the tactical displays showing FBI agents moving into final positions around Brian's compound. His presence provides steady comfort during these final crucial moments, a reminder that whatever happens next, we face it together as the family that Brian has tried so desperately to destroy. Emma and Jake are going to be okay, Michael says quietly, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who has spent the past 2 days proving his commitment to our children through actions rather than words. They know who their family is, and they know that we'll never stop fighting to bring them home safely. Agent Stevens' voice crackles through the communication system as tactical teams report their readiness for coordinated action. All units in position. Target buildings secure, preparing for entry and child extraction. The next 20 minutes unfold with the precision and efficiency of a military operation, federal agents executing rescue procedures while minimizing risk to Emma and Jake's safety. Through thermal imaging and direct communication, we monitor the team's progress as they locate and secure the children while simultaneously apprehending Brian and processing the crime scene he's created. When Agent Walsh finally announces that Emma and Jake are safe and in federal custody, the relief that floods through me is so intense that I nearly collapse. 48 hours of terror, uncertainty and psychological warfare finally end with the simple confirmation that my children are alive, unharmed and returning to the protection of people who love them unconditionally. The reunion takes place in a secure medical facility where Emma and Jake receive immediate evaluation for physical and psychological trauma. Their small bodies in my arms feel like the most precious cargo in the world, their voices telling me about their adventure with Daddy, revealing both their resilience and the careful psychological manipulation they've endured. Mommy, Daddy kept saying that you and Michael didn't really love us anymore because we were too much trouble. Emma reports with the matter-of-fact directness of an 8-year-old who has processed complex emotional manipulation. But we knew he was lying because real families don't stop loving each other just because things get hard. Jake, exhausted from 3 days of confusion and fear, falls asleep against my shoulder while federal agents coordinate his medical examination and psychological evaluation. His complete trust in my protection, despite everything Brian has tried to teach him about my unreliability, demonstrates the strength of bonds built through daily care and consistent love. The federal prosecutor who meets with us explains the extensive charges that Brian will face as a result of his elaborate kidnapping operation. The combination of federal crimes, kidnapping across state lines, weapons violations, fabrication of evidence and child endangerment, could result in decades of imprisonment, effectively ending his involvement in our children's lives until they reach adulthood. Ms. Torres, your ex-husband's actions represent one of the most sophisticated domestic kidnapping cases we've prosecuted. The prosecutor explains during our briefing. His military training and months of preparation created a situation that required significant federal resources to resolve safely. The psychological manipulation component alone constitutes multiple felony charges related to child abuse. Agent Walsh approaches as we prepare for transport back to Denver, her expression carrying both professional satisfaction and personal relief that the operation concluded without loss of life. Ms. Torres, I want you to know that Emma and Jake's strength and clarity throughout this ordeal contributed significantly to their safe recovery.
Their understanding of family relationships remained intact despite their father's attempts to manipulate their perception. The flight back to Denver takes place in a specially equipped federal aircraft that allows Emma and Jake to decompress from their ordeal while receiving ongoing psychological support from trained specialists. They sleep for most of the journey, their small bodies finally relaxing after days of stress and hypervigilance. Lisa meets us at the private terminal with a convoy of family members whose relief at seeing Emma and Jake safe creates an emotional homecoming that underscores the bonds Brian tried so desperately to break. Margaret and Robert Chen embrace all of us as if we've returned from a war zone, which in many ways reflects the reality of what we've endured. The legal framework is already in place for permanent custody modification, Lisa reports as we transfer to waiting vehicle. Brian's actions over the past 48 hours have terminated his parental rights in the eyes of every court with jurisdiction. He'll have no legal access to Emma and Jake pending the resolution of federal criminal charges. The drive home through familiar Denver neighborhoods feels like returning to civilization after an extended wilderness survival ordeal. Emma and Jake point out recognizable landmarks with excitement, their joy at returning to normal surroundings, providing hope for their psychological recovery from Brian's manipulation campaign. Our house in Lakewood appears exactly as we left it 3 days ago, but everything feels transformed by the trauma we've survived and the strength we've discovered in our family bond. The backyard where Michael and Jake built their treehouse represents the stable, nurturing environment that Brian's jealousy and possessiveness tried to destroy through criminal action. Patricia Hendricks, the child psychologist Margaret arranged, meets with Emma and Jake individually to begin assessing their emotional state and developing strategies for processing their experience with their father's psychological manipulation. Her initial evaluations suggest remarkable resilience and an intact sense of family identity despite Brian's elaborate efforts to undermine their security. Children often surprise us with their ability to distinguish between authentic love and manipulative behavior, Hendricks explains during her consultation with Michael and me. Emma and Jake clearly recognized that their father's actions contradicted his stated motivations, which protected them from the worst psychological effects of his manipulation campaign. Michael and I finally exchange wedding vows 6 weeks later in our backyard, surrounded by family members who have proven their commitment to our happiness through their support during the kidnapping crisis. Emma and Jake serve as flower girl and ring bearer just as originally planned, their participation in our marriage ceremony representing their complete acceptance of our family structure. The ceremony itself lacks the elaborate planning and formal elegance of our originally scheduled celebration, but the vows we exchange carry weight and meaning that our first attempt could never have achieved. They're spoken by two people who have proven their commitment to each other and to our children under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Brian's trial takes place 8 months later, a legal proceeding that serves as the final chapter in his attempt to control our family's destiny through manipulation and violence. The evidence against him is overwhelming: recorded phone calls, FBI surveillance footage, testimony from Emma and Jake about their experience, and physical evidence from his elaborate kidnapping operation. His conviction on multiple federal charges results in a 25-year prison sentence, effectively ending his involvement in our children's lives until they're adults capable of making their own informed decisions about contact with their father. The judge's comments during sentencing acknowledged the sophisticated nature of his planning, while condemning the psychological damage inflicted on children he claimed to love. Emma and Jake testify through closed-circuit video, their composed and articulate descriptions of their experience, demonstrating their remarkable recovery from Brian's psychological manipulation. They express sadness about their father's choices, while clearly stating their desire to continue living with Michael and me as a complete family unit. 2 years after the kidnapping, Emma and Jake have largely processed their traumatic experience, though they occasionally ask questions about why their father made such destructive choices, and whether he might someday understand that healthy families are built through love and support rather than control and manipulation. Michael officially adopts both children through legal proceedings that Brian does not contest from prison, creating the permanent legal bonds that reflect the emotional reality of our family relationship. Emma and Jake enthusiastically participate in the adoption ceremony, their joy at officially becoming Chingians marking their complete integration into our extended family network. Our experience has become part of federal law enforcement training programs about domestic kidnapping cases, helping agents understand the psychological dynamics that can escalate custody disputes into federal crime. The tactical approaches developed during Emma and Jake's rescue have been refined and applied to similar situations, potentially preventing other families from enduring the trauma we survived. Emma, now 10 years old, occasionally mentions wanting to write a letter to her father in prison, expressing both forgiveness for his actions and firm boundaries about her own life choices. Her emotional maturity in processing such complex feelings continues to amaze the therapists who monitor her psychological development. Jake, 8 years old and thriving academically and socially, shows no lasting negative effects from his father's psychological manipulation. His trusting nature and sunny disposition have been fully restored through consistent love and security from family members who demonstrate care through supportive actions, rather than controlling behavior. Our marriage has emerged stronger rather than damaged from the crisis that began on our wedding day, the shared experience of fighting for our family's survival creating an unshakable foundation for our partnership. We've learned that love isn't just an emotion or commitment, it's a choice that must be made repeatedly, especially when facing challenges that test every assumption about family loyalty and protection. The lessons Emma and Jake learned during their father's kidnapping weren't the ones Brian intended to teach. Instead of learning to distrust outsiders and prioritize genetic relationships above all else, they discovered that authentic families are built through daily choices to care for each other. Love multiplies rather than diminishes when shared with additional people, and that true protection comes from people willing to risk everything for each other's safety and happiness. 5 years later, our family continues to thrive in ways that Brian's controlling vision could never have achieved. Emma and Jake are confident teenagers who understand that their father's actions came from his own psychological wounds, rather than genuine care for their well-being. They've chosen to focus their emotional energy on the people who consistently demonstrate love through supportive actions, rather than manipulative behavior. Brian's elaborate plan to destroy our family and reclaim his children ultimately strengthened every bond he tried to break, proving that relationships built on choice, consistency and unconditional love are more resilient than those based on possession, control and genetic connection. His attempt to teach Emma and Jake about family loyalty succeeded, but not in the way he intended. They learned that loyalty means supporting each other through difficult times, not demanding exclusive devotion that excludes others who offer genuine care and love. The wedding dress I wore during the kidnapping crisis now hangs in our closet as a reminder of how quickly life can change, and how important it is to fight for the people and relationships that truly matter. The stains and tears in the fabric tell the story of 3 days that tested everything we believed about family love and commitment, ultimately proving that bonds built on choice and daily care are stronger than those based on genetics or legal documents alone. Our family's journey from that shattered wedding day to our current happiness illustrates the resilience of love when faced with hatred, the power of choice over genetics in defining family relationships, and the importance of never allowing fear to prevent us from protecting the people we care about most. Brian's attempt to control our destiny through violence and manipulation ultimately freed us to build something stronger and more authentic than anything he could have destroyed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.